our ranking member, Chaffetz, members of the subcommittee hearing, witnesses, and all those in attendance. Today's hearing will examine the trends and characteristics of the present-day federal workforce, as well as assess the federal government's human resource management capabilities. The chair, ranking member, and subcommittee members will each have 5 minutes to make the opening statements, and all members will have 3 days to submit revisions and statements for the record. At this time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the testimony from the Human Rights Campaign be submitted for the record. Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Again, I'd like to welcome our ranking member, Jason Chaffetz, and my fellow members of the subcommittee as we hold our first hearing to examine the federal workforce issues in the 111th Congress. I'd also like to thank today's witnesses for helping our subcommittee with its work. While the federal government faces an unprecedented number of major policy issues and challenges that must be addressed on behalf of the American people, it's critically important that we take a moment to evaluate the state of our workforce and the 2.6 million men and women responsible for making government work every day. Today's hearing is entitled The Public Service in the 21st Century, an examination of the state of the federal workforce. And I've called this morning's hearing to examine the trends and characteristics of the present-day federal workforce, as well as to assess the current status of the federal government's human resource management capabilities. The subcommittee will explore both the structure and the quality of the government's people management skills and determine what future legislation might be needed to tackle any of the issues and gaps in coverage presented here. In many ways, today's hearing will lay the groundwork for considering the various approaches or policies needed to ensure that the government is operating as an employer and is up to the task of meeting these pressing challenges. For the United States to remain a global power, high-performing civil servants are necessary to do the business of government. And in turn, these employees should be rewarded for their talents, their skills, their hard work, and as public servants. I believe the federal government must be in a position to respond to the changing nature of public service and to address those answering the call of public service. As chairman of the subcommittee, I'm committed to making this happen. It is our responsibility here in Congress to ensure that federal agencies are equipped with the resources necessary to attaining proper staffing levels and providing beneficial training and rewarding their accomplished workforce. I expect that today's witnesses will both bring us up to speed on the pressing needs and issues facing today's federal employees, as well as offer effective human resource management strategies for the government to adopt, based on their own experiences and their day-to-day knowledge. I look forward to an informative hearing this morning. This concludes my opening statements, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I appreciate you calling this hearing here today. I appreciate the witnesses who are taking time from their busy schedules to be here and share this information with us. I also want to particularly thank the in excess of 2.6 million men and women across this country who care deeply about their country, who work hard, and are often the unsung heroes and don't get nearly enough recognition and credit for the hard work and dedication they put into their jobs, serving their communities, and making this country the greatest country on the face of the planet. I would like to apologize in part at the beginning here for the up and down nature of my needing to scoot next door. My committee assignment in Judiciary has a number of bills in markup, and please don't let that be a reflection of lack of interest. I will be able to review the record in its entirety, but my apologies, Mr. Chairman, for the up and down nature of having two meetings at the same time. I do have an extended statement that I would ask a unanimous consent be submitted to the record. And with that, if that's okay with you, then I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Belbray's here,
I think this is a particularly important hearing to have now, because I'm confused. On the one hand, before this, we have been having hearings on the flight of federal workers from the workforce. One of the things I'm most interested in is whether or not the putrid economy we inherited has had an effect on making the baby boomers, the oldest of whom have begun to retire, want to stay on. These are very experienced workers in whom we have invested a great deal. On the other hand, I understand that there has been substantial turnover in the federal workforce. I don't know if those are the ones who got out before they looked at their functional equivalent of the 401k or not. But I do think that what you're doing is very, very important in preparing us for a period ahead, which looks like it may be a bit different from the hearings we've had in the past, where we pulled out our hair because we thought that we were losing workers at such a rapid rate. I thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing.
Thank you. Mr. Bilbray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say I appreciate the hearing. As a former public employee, I think that too often those of us on the policy side forget that every study in the world has proven that even though compensation and status is important in public employment, job satisfaction, of feeling like you're doing something productive, is the #1 component of retention of public employees. And we overlook that all the time because you can't negotiate this and you can't quantify it on a piece of paper. It's something that has to be an overall goal of the whole team. When people feel like they're making a difference, like they're actually doing something rather than just filling a seat during a period of time, that job satisfaction is reflected not only in the longevity, but in increased productivity. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that I would ask us to look at is to recognize that while it's easy for us to look at what the pay rates are and compare to the private sector, what the ability to move up the status level in public employee is, that the ability of the bureaucracy to actually perform and provide the services the public wants is the most critical component, not only to the taxpayer and the constituency, but to the public employees themselves. And I think that's one thing that we overlook all again. I was a lifeguard, and let me just tell you something. I would have taken half the pay for the days where I made the 50 rescues, for the days that I sat through those cold, dreary winters when nobody else was on the beach except myself. And I even got a premium for sitting through those cold days. Of course, that's cold days in San Diego. You got to remember, that's 60 degrees. But I just think that we forget about that too often, because too often we think about just pay and status rather than service. And remember, people in a public employee are the overwhelming ones that really need to be retained, are those who care more about service than even their own compensation. So I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I agree. As a current public employee, I agree heartily. Not a lifeguard, sort of lifeguard, but without the water. How about it is the common policy of this committee that witnesses are sworn in, and so I would ask the witness to please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that this testimony you will give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record indicate that the witness has answered in the affirmative, and the witness's entire statement is already included in the record. The green light will indicate you have 5 minutes to summarize your statement. I'm sorry, the green light indicates you have 5 minutes, and then the yellow light means you have 1 minute remaining to summarize your statement, and the red light indicates that your time has expired. We are gifted this morning to have as our first witness the very new Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, John Berry. John Berry serves as a Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, which manages the federal government civil service. Prior to Mr. Berry's appointment as Director of OPM, he was the Director of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Director of the Smithsonian Zoological Park. Mr. Berry previously served as Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget at the Department of the Interior during the Clinton administration, where he oversaw a number of programs to improve employees' work-life balance. Earlier, he served as Legislative Director to the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer for 10 years, and as Steny's lead on federal employee issues, he helped to guide the negotiations that led to the 1990 Federal Employees Pay Comparability Act. We welcome the new director. I think it's been 6 or 7 days now, so we want to hear everything you've accomplished so far. And welcome, Director Berry.
There we go. Can you hear me? That's okay? Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm especially pleased for my inaugural hearing as the new director to be with you today so that we can really step back, and I think this is a great time to do this at the beginning of a new administration, and look at where are we with the Federal Civil Service. In day 7 on the job, I have to tell you my reaction after my first week on the job has been a little bit, I feel that I am a member of either, I'm not sure which movie I fit into, either Back to the Future or Groundhog Day, but when I was working these issues back in 1985 for Mr. Hoyer, it was interesting, and I just want to give you sort of my sense to begin with, if I could, since my statement's been in the record, to give you my sense of where I think we are today. Back in 85, the Employment Cost Index identified at that time a comparability gap between federal employees and their counterparts in the private sector that averaged somewhere between 20 and 25%. Now, there was an argument at the time as to what exactly how it was, but it was a clear agreement that there was a gap. The bad news is that that gap is essentially, that argument has not moved in the 25 years since I have come back to this issue. We are still in that same, the ECI index, that we're still arguing it's somewhere between 20 and 25%, but it's still a very significant gap. Now, obviously, through the lens of one of the most serious recessions since the Great Depression, that gap might not be as evident today in terms of what we're looking at and seeing in trends, but it is something we need to always keep in the back of our minds as to our competitiveness and our abilities. On diversity, I look at every rank, on every category. Diversity hasn't moved hardly at all since '85 in terms of federal representation across the board. Our scores would be laughable even at a T-ball game. It is an embarrassment. Union labor management relations, I would categorize right now as weak to non-existent. The concept of partnership has dried up, and we need to be about reviving it. On hiring, and I think this is one that it is widely recognized in the public, but after my quick assessment, having been at OPM, like I say, this week, I would rate our hiring at, you would best measure it in geologic time. It uses a language that was last used, I think, with the lost civilization of Atlantis. And I think there is a modern concern. You know, in 1883, when Teddy Roosevelt sat in this chair in the prior Civil Service Commission, he was up here primarily concerned that people got federal employment by basically providing payments to members of Congress in the House and the Senate. Well, today, if you want a federal job, you're not giving that money to a member of Congress or a senator, but you're giving it to a company that's helping you fill out the application, which I think is an outrage. We ought to be able to allow people to apply for jobs in a simple way using plain English that allows us to hire people who are qualified for the jobs based on their determination of their qualifications. And the fact that it is so complicated is something we have got to break. On recruitment, we have a nice tool belt, but it doesn't have many tools in it. On internships, we have one of the worst conversion rates in the United States. Right now, we hired about 50,000 interns on average a year, and during the summer months, we convert less than 1% of those to real employment. Now, the private sector converts somewhere, it ranges between 25 and 50% of those interns. They use their intern program as a way to give a trial run to folks and bring good people on board. We don't do that in the federal government, and it's a huge lost opportunity. You all read in the paper this morning in Joe Davidson's column about our IT issues and the GAO report on retirement. That is one of many IT issues that I've been briefed on this week. I got to tell you, it's a big problem, and it is one that's going to require a lot of attention. I am extremely concerned over what I consider to be a balkanized pay system. We are now in a situation where we do not have a majority pay system for the United States government. And we have workers sitting side by side doing the exact same job, being paid differently. And I can't defend that to you with a straight face. And I think it is now reached the point, we can get along with sort of doing experiments and demonstrations and trying different flexibilities, but at some point we've got to come back and say what makes sense, what works, and design a system that works for the majority of workers in the federal government. Training. It's the first thing cut in a budget, and it's the last thing restored. And we've got to change that. In our complex world, we can't deal with that. Our performance appraisal systems lack credibility with the employee, with managers, and with the public. We've got to do a better job. And my experience with OPM's budget is that essentially what I have found is that a majority of our budget is on a reimbursable basis. Now what that means is I may have my hand on the rudder, but the rudder is not responding. We are responding to where our customer is putting the dollar. And our discretionary budget is so small that it doesn't allow us to lead in ways that we need to. Now that's a pretty bleak assessment to begin with. There are some bright spots, and I would begin with them. I think there are three, and the good news is those bright spots overwhelm any of these dark ones. The first is that, thank God, despite all of these challenges and dark forecasts, which I've just explained to you, the outstanding men and women who serve this country today in the civil service are doing an incredible job. They are staying focused. They are delivering the product that the taxpayer expects, and hats off to them for not letting the systems where we have failed them, essentially, affect their work. Mr. Bilbrey, you are dead right. And I am happy to report to you that our morale surveys actually show that we're doing pretty well on that front. And it's a good thing that our employees actually think they're doing important work. They think it matters to this republic. Their importance, they understand the importance of their work, and they believe that they're contributing to the health of the nation. And that is actually our rating, our survey ratings have gone up on that. So it's an absolute rock solid important thing. If we didn't have that, we couldn't really move forward. But because we've got that, and we've got solid men and women in the civil service, I think we can fix each of these other things. And then the final three, the third bright spot I would mention to you is that employees at OPM I have met are solid. We've got some great management talent, and the employees I've met are skilled, they're professionals, and I think the bottom line is if my leadership is up to snuff, we ought to be able to do something on these darker points that I've made to you. Mr. Chairman, I know I'm going over, but if with your indulgence, maybe one or two more minutes.
With all due respect to Mr. Director, you've been over for a long time now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
However, I think perhaps in the course of our questioning and answering, you can hit on the other points that you want to hit on. I just don't want to set a precedent of allowing you 10 minutes and then everybody else is 5.
Gotcha.
So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, seeing he spent so much time complimenting me, I think he should be given another 20 minutes.
I was actually going to cut him off when he started doing that, but
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to mention,
Sure,
what I would like
please.
to comment is the game plan for what I see as the way forward. And hopefully in question and answer, we could get some of that out, because I don't want to leave it at all as the dark. I believe we have a bright path forward, and what I would just, would like to lay before the committee what my vision would be for addressing all of the issues that I've raised with you.
terrific. Thank you. And what I'll do is I can actually, in the questioning portion of this, I can give you ample opportunity to make those points, which are indeed important. Let me begin the questioning with that. We've got a situation here where the central, and we talked about this before, you and I, where you have a system that is rule-bound for federal employees, that might have served the needs of federal employees some decades ago, but that has hung on, and that as a result of the unworkability of some of those guidelines and rules, independent agencies, not just to flaunt the rules, but to accomplish things, actually opted out and created their own systems for hiring, for promoting, for assessing performance. So now what we have, and this has happened everywhere, and I don't blame the agencies because they were trying to do something that actually worked, that was common sense and productive. So I don't think that they just through ill will broke out of the rules. I think they did it by necessity. However, now we're left with I don't know if you call it balkanized, but I wouldn't want to do that injustice to the people of the Balkans. It is not a system at all. It is because system, implies some type of coherence and compatibility. This is really an ad hoc system that has now been created by different agencies to do their own thing, basically, to try to get things done. So we've got a real hodgepodge out there of employment policy. So, that hurts OPM because it's your job to provide that overall framework. How do we get there? How do we create a framework that takes the best of the lessons learned that we have out there? Some of these agencies are doing wonderful things, innovative, in spite of our ham-fisted attempt at managing human resources. How do we take the best but knit together a system that doesn't result in having folks working side by side at the same desk making disparately different salaries, both of them working hard at the same job? How do we get there?
Mr. Chairman, I think you've hit the nail right on the head. I think it is time for us to really think, and it will take the partnership of everyone on this committee, I think all of the people testifying here today to work together with us on this, to essentially come up with a new baseline system. I think that system has to sort of have three key elements to it, if I were, in terms of what the roadmap forward on this. One is it needs to be a fair system for employees. Employees need to feel that the basic pay structure that it establishes has meaning, it is related to standards and that are recognized, and that employees feel that it is fair and applied fairly across the board. Second big point I would make, Mr. Chairman, it's got to have a credible assessment system. It's got to be clear on telling people what their job is, what their critical elements are, holding them accountable to performing those, correcting them where they're weak, rewarding them where they're strong, and eliminating non-performers. And, so I think we need to come up with, that's got to be a critical element of this to the American public. The third thing is training. And we mentioned that. It is unfortunately non-existent pretty much across the government today. And that has to be a key component of any major plan going forward, because we kid ourselves. You can get away cutting training for 1 or 2 years, but you can't do it for the long run as we have done in the government. And so I think those three elements, if we can come up with a fair pay system, a credible assessment system and appraisal approach, and a strong training component, if we can devise a system that has strength on those three fronts, I think we can restore the integrity of a majority pay system for the country.
Thank you. At this point, I recognize for questioning Mr. Chaffetz, our ranking member.
Again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, and congratulations on the new appointment. Let me ask you, pay for performance, does it work?
There are some, as in any system, there are good things and there are bad things. I think we have found some very good things, and there's some warning lights. I am meeting, in fact, later today with the Deputy Secretary of Defense to discuss the Defense Department's system that they have developed, and how we can assess that. But
do you think it has room in the federal government, in the workforce?
Performance, it has to be in the federal government. It is in the GS system.
Pay for performance or just performance?
Well, it is not widely used, but I'll tell you, having been a manager, you can use it. Within grade steps can be tied to annual performance appraisals.
Where do you see the challenges then with it?
It is not strong enough. We do not have a system that has credibility with any of the major partners that we need to have it, the employees, the managers, or the public.
Yeah, and it just to editorialize a little bit myself, your check marks here of being fair and credible and the training component I think are spot on. I would concur with that. I would just hope that given the short time here for me to ask a series of questions, that you do seriously consider. I do think it has relevancy, maybe not for every job, but certainly the concept, the principle, the idea that we're rewarding performance, I think is sorely needed, and it could be implemented in an effective way, and I'm glad to hear your comments on that. I would like to go, if I could, to this Washington Post story that came out today, because you certainly have your hands full. Of particular note was this idea that the OPM cut it. It says, quote, in October, the OPM cut its losses when it killed a $290 million 10-year contract with Hewitt Associates. Maybe we should have them here, which was to have developed an advanced retirement calculator to speed the processing of claims by, anyway, it goes on. What are we going to do about that?
The good news is we didn't lose $290 million, but by closing off the contract, essentially I think we cut our losses. This has been a huge problem. This has been the third attempt OPM has made at this of revising the retirement system. This started back in 1982. There have been 3 attempts. The total cost that's been invested over that period of time, over both Republican and Democratic administration attempts to reform this, is approaching $100 million. What we have to show for that is precious little. We have been able to, with that money, at least cobble together a patchwork quilt system that manages to work. But it does it in a way that does not inspire confidence. And I just got briefed on this in my first week. And I can tell you this, I am not just going to race off and continue what's been happening since 1982. I think we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to engage and involve other agencies that have done major systems innovations. Social Security does this regularly. The IRS does this regularly for a lot more people than we're talking about. And I think in many ways, my just personal assessment of where this went off the tracks is they tried to swallow the elephant.
Could you maybe pick a different animal?
That's a good. Apologies to the metaphor.
But point well taken.
They were trying to solve everything, and as an end result, solved nothing. And
how would you rank this in terms of your priorities as you?
We've got to. Let me tell you that the core part of it is that we got to do the job right. Is we got to figure out what retirees are owed correctly, and we got to pay them correctly on time. That's job one. And so, what my direction is to my team is going to be is let's figure out how to do job one well. That's a must-have. It would be nice if employees could sit at their desk and call up their retirement system and play with options and think about what day they could retire. I think of that as a nice to have. And we ought not be wasting money trying to do the nice to haves until we have the must haves done. And so my game plan here is going to be to whittle this down to what must be done, because we right now, our systems that are providing these checks and making these determinations are on the verge of failure. They're working, and they're working today accurately, but we need to make sure they can continue to work and handle the growing boom. And so I'm going to whittle that down to that core issue and then focus on it by bringing in other outside expertise to advise us on a course forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Berry, the last time I spoke to you, you were running the zoo, and I'm trying to understand what it is about running the zoo that makes you so qualified to run federal employees, and I'll put that aside for the moment. I know of your long service in the federal government. I'm pleased to have you, particularly given the demonstration of managerial excellence you have shown throughout your service. I indicated my confusion about whether we have openings or not, whether people are retiring or not. I would like you to clear that up for me. We understand that there are still challenges in recruiting people to public service. We see the administration going all out to make public service sexy again, shall we say. Are people retiring at the same rates they were before the economic crisis or not? And if there is so much unemployment, why are you having trouble recruiting people to federal service now?
Congressman Norton, I think right now I would have to get back to you to see if we have accurate data. I have not seen data that captures the current moment which would be right on point with your question.
I would ask you to get us that data within 30 days. That's critical. An early sign of whether or not there has been some cessation of what was people taking early retirement, and they were getting out of Dodge, and then using all of our investment in them to go into the private sector, even become contractors and use our experience then in that way. Tell us about contracting out. Why would the government be contracting out if you're having such trouble recruiting people? Is contracting out the only way to get the federal job done, or do you intend to do the wholesale contracting out of the government that we have seen in the last several years?
Definitively no is the answer to, is it the only way to get the job done? Contracting out can be a very helpful tool for the government when it is used strategically. When it is used sloppily and slipshottily, I think we need to be very careful, because it can essentially confuse the mission of the government. It can blur its regulatory responsibilities. We need to be very careful with it. And right now, my sense is, my understanding is that the government is going to be we're going to face a different issue. Rather than contracting out, we're going to face what we call insourcing. A lot of departments have been discussing with me, including the Department of Defense, wanting to move what they believe are employees that are providing on contract basis back onto the federal rolls. And so our challenge is going to be, how can we do that? How can we handle the hiring and make sure we get those people back onto the rolls that are good and allow for fair and open competition consistent with the merit principles? So I think what you're going to see is a new trend in government. And to your point about the retirees, there's no question, with an aging society, we have got to be creative in figuring out how we're going to benefit from that skill set and that talent. It ought not just be on the golf course. We need to keep those people in government longer. We need to figure out how we're going to re-engage their assets. And to do that fairly, it's a complicated thing, because we have to balance that with still providing opportunity for growth.
One of the things that encourage people to leave government is to take your pension and then become an employee of a contractor. And Mr. Berry, I wish you would do some work to discover just how many federal employees leave the federal government to go on to a contract, and whether that's in the interest of the federal government. Finally, let me ask you about the union management partnership. One of the most effective notions I remember from the Clinton administration was, I believe this is the right name for a union management partnership, which even some federal agencies, understand the EPA, have begun to reestablish. These things were wiped out. I don't know why one wouldn't just want to talk to unions if you believe in labor peace. Are you considering reestablishing the union management partnership notion, which would cover all agencies in the federal government?
Yes, we are very seriously looking at that, Congresswoman Norton. In fact, that was going to be my second priority in terms of, after overall pay reform, of reviving partnership and an effective and active partnership program with labor. And I will be looking forward to work with both all of the union heads, the Office of Management and Budget, and the President to see if we can sculpt a positive way forward that creates a positive relationship between labor and management.
Right. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Bill Bray, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Let me just follow up on the issue that the delegates brought up, the gentleladies raising different issues about the way the system's structured, almost to encourage people to retire and leave the system. And I think one of the examples is that the current pay caps for GS-15s means they can earn up to a certain amount. And if they stay employed, they're locked into a limit. But their continuing service, there is no such limit for their retirement benefits continue to grow. So you literally create a situation to where there's an incentive to retire, not to stay employed. So I think a lot of this, as we talk about the way the individuals may move the private sector, why is this done? What's the logic behind it?
You know, Mr. Bilberry, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't give you a good explanation of what the logic of that is. So, I think this is going to be it's got to be an issue we all wrestle with together.
Shouldn't it be sort of flipped the other way? Then that seemed like it's really stacked in the opposite direction that logically. I know that I hate to use that term around the federal systems, but let's use that radical concept of logic. Why would an employer create a system like this?
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to pretend to tell you that I wouldn't defend it because I don't understand exactly why they would do it. It certainly seems counterintuitive. But I think I do need to talk to some people who understand this issue in detail and make sure I'm not missing something.
Okay, so we agree that on its face, it looks like it's something that needs to be changed, but let's look into it. I think there's a justification to say justify this process, not based on something that went on before or some kind of agreement that went on before, but what is the outcome right now? And I just hope we spend more time looking at outcomes rather than intentions and be willing to be brave enough to go correct it. Mr. Chairman, I've always said ever since, government, the biggest problem with Washington is we try new things or that we make mistakes, but that when we try new things and make mistakes, we're not brave enough to go back and correct it. So I would ask us we take a look at that. Mr. Berry, I served 16 years on Air Resources Board agencies in California, and one of the most environmentally friendly and energy conservation strategies that we could ever implement is telecommuting and flex time to reduce the emissions and the consumption of fuel for employees going back and forth, and reduce the demand on having to build new infrastructure to carry it. Now, the Patent and Trade Office has demonstrated that they can work within a telecommunication issue. What's the status of this concept across the board when it comes to the federal workforce?
You will find in me, sir, a strong proponent of both telecommuting and flex time. I agree with your assessment. These are valuable tools, not only for the employees, improving their productivity and enhancing their family work-life situation, but in also affecting our environment in a positive manner. So I'll be very supportive of it. I think, we do have to be careful and work with managers. As Ms. Norton pointed out, I ran the National Zoo, and it would be, unfortunately, there are some positions you just can't telecommute. You got to feed the animals in the morning. They can't do that from home. So, at some positions, it can't work. But for those that it can, we really ought to exploit it. We need to be supportive of it. We need to make it easier, and we need to make it more accessible throughout the federal government.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll just tell you a story off one of the most deserted parts of the world, the central coast of Baja California. I ran into a French engineer on his boat who was delivering his work to Paris by the internet every day. Boy, that's the kind of job I'm looking for down the line. But I think I just think these are two issues that the delegate and I totally agree on, and I know that the problem we ran into in California is that organized labor did not like the concept because they saw it as being a barrier or giving independence to an employee separate from the organized strategy and harder to organize because they weren't physically in one plant. That's not the problem here, is it?
I would have to talk with our labor leaders about that. In the spirit of partnership, I think one of the first rules of partnership is good and fair and open communication. So I'd like to pose that question with them and really discuss and get their input. My assessment is where there is a bargaining unit, that would obviously be something that would be subject of the bargaining process. So I think I'd look forward to working with the nationals and their leaders to see if we can solve concerns they might have, because the objective is a good one. It's an important one. we need to be about doing as much as we can to improve the work life and workplace for our federal employees, and those are two good tools to do it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just in closing, let me just say, I find it hard to believe that that's a problem in our federal system. I hope it isn't. My frustration was in California at the state system, that they literally said that an individual could not make an agreement with management to do telecommunicating unless it was incorporated into a formal union agreement, which created huge barriers. And I hope that I just can't believe we've made that mistake in the federal system, and I hope that we avoid that. I think the individual still is premier against the bureaucracy or even organized labor, that the individual really needs to be allowed to do the right thing. So thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Berry.
I thank the gentleman. And just to clarify a point, in the chairman's discussions with the labor unions in this instance, labor unions have actually been advocates, I must say. They've been advocates of telework and providing flexibility for workers. So it's not the situation that the gentleman from California feared. It's the opposite situation where the union representatives in this case are saying telework is actually something that helps the quality of life of the employees that they represent. And they have not been obstructionists. They've actually been advocates of finding ways to make workers more productive by utilizing where it is appropriate. And there are some cases, as the director out, where it's impossible, but they have been certainly open and supportive of the practice. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and let me begin by reinforcing the chairman's point. My experience in local government and here in the National Capital Region as the chairman of the Council of Governments was actually the workforce was more than cooperative. They saw telework as actually a benefit. Telework is not defined as 5 days a week out of the office, by the way. Telework officially is defined as at least 1 day of the week, not at your normal place of work, in a remote location. It could be from home or wherever. I think in an era where we're worried about recruitment and retention, not only in the private sector, but in the public sector, telework is a tool. I also believe in the post-9/11 world, telework is an essential part of your continuity of operations plan. If you don't have a vigorous telework plan in place, I don't know how you get to a continuity of operations plan. But I would say to you, Mr. Berry, I think, based on my own experience, I was the chairman of Fairfax County, right across the river.
Yes, sir.
I had a workforce of 12,000. I set a goal. The goal was 20% of our eligible workforce teleworking by the year 2005. We exceeded that goal. The first thing we did was to decide, well, who's eligible? So we didn't have a zoo, but for example, police officers can't call in their beat. So they had to work. They couldn't not show up. But we identified the rest of the workforce, and then we said, okay, 20% of that workforce, what are we going to do? But it requires a leadership from the top. Managers, supervisors are not going to do it if they honestly, at the end of the day, believe this is lip service. In a region as congested as ours, not to have the federal government leading telework is almost criminal. And yet, consistently, it's been the federal government that's been the laggard in our region, behind the private sector, behind state and local government. So we need to systematize telework. It's got to be in HR policy manuals. The workforce needs to know very clearly what's expected of me if I sign up for this. How will I be supervised? Supervisors need to know how to evaluate workers. This is not rocket science. It's not terra incognita. We've got lots of experience. But I urge you strongly to systematize telework. And Mr. Chairman, I would urge Mr. Berry to come back to us maybe in 6 months and talk to us on this subject alone maybe, because I do think it's such an important tool, and I'm delighted to hear of your support, Mr. Berry. Let me ask, one of the things we've talked about in this committee, and I hear increasingly a source of concern, not only in the workforce but among federal contractors, is sort of the loss of expert acquisition and procurement capability within the federal government. How are we going to address that very complex subject?
You know, OPM has the team that was there before me did a pretty good job on helping with the stimulus bill, recognizing that that was going to be a critical hire group. And OPM created a special category and conferred, deferential to the agencies so that they could move forward with direct hire authority in that regard. And I think so far that looks like it's been very helpful to many of the agencies in moving quickly with the stimulus and recovery funds. I'm actually looking at and thinking that another category that is in dire need and of equal importance is our HR professional capacity throughout the government. In many cases, that has essentially been hollowed out over time. And as agencies seek under this bill, and especially agencies that are in a growing situation, like the IRS, like the Defense Department, that will be hiring significant number of employees, it's essential that they have super HR staff on board. And so one of the things we're looking at is how OPM can play a significant role in making that easier as well, speeding up that process, putting it into plain English, and creating essentially a pool of applicants that would be pre-certified, if you will, through the a regular application, wide open, competitive process, but that then the agencies would be able to hire directly from that pool of expertise and get the HR staff that they need on. So I think there's probably other categories we're going to have to treat similarly, but hopefully those can be some first, we've made some solid steps with the contracting position that you discussed. I think we can continue that progress and move it forward.
I think the feedback we get is, especially when you move to large, complex, integrated contracts, making sure we've got the resident expertise in-house is increasingly a challenge because, frankly, that expertise gravitating toward the private sector is very tempting.
Yeah.
The other problem, let me ask you, though, is it actually has to do with policy, not just talent and resources. Many contractors will talk about the fact that they'll have many, many, many project managers, contract managers over the life of the contract. That leads to a discontinuity in management, different expectations about scope of work, and often some distortions as a result in terms of the work product delivered. Are there things we could do to try to incentivize more continuity in the contract management part of the federal government?
That's a great question, Mr. Connolly, and I don't have anything off the top of my head to give you some specifics in that regard, but it's certainly something I can look into. I think it's something we need to pay attention to. We also need to be careful, as we talked about with Delegate Norton, as we move into an era where we might be dealing with much more insourcing rather than outsourcing, that continuity can also be provided in-house as well, so that as we move things from the private sector, that we can also provide a smooth management transition as well. So we're going to have to wrestle with those issues in both directions.
My final question, Mr. Chairman. Both Delegate Norton and I represent lots of federal workers, and both of us were here in Washington before the Metro was constructed. Now 40%, I believe, of the total passengers every day on a very successful system are in fact federal workers. What would happen if we shut down Metro tomorrow and the federal workforce no longer had Metro to be able to get to work?
It would be a disaster. It would be, the road system is not set up to handle that amount of people. The Metro system is critical to the smooth and federal operation of this government and its headquarters operations. And I can't imagine our effective operation without it. It's critical.
So one might inferentially conclude from your testimony that the federal government has more than a passing interest in the success of Metro and in its financing.
Well, I think you might want to take that question up with the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, but I certainly personally, as a rider and user, as a local boy who has grown up in this area, and Carmen Turner, who is my beloved mentor, God rest her soul, who ran the Metro system at one point. I love the Metro system. I think it's great. It's great for our air quality in this area, and it's a great asset to living in the Washington, D.C. area. It's critical for our federal employees.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. The leading question, but it's certainly a nice segue. We do have an upcoming hearing on the Metro in this subcommittee that Ms. Norton has been a major advocate for, so we will certainly address that issue. I do recognize, no, okay. The ranking member for the entire committee, Mr. Isa, has joined us, but he's declined his opportunity to question. Rather than do another round of questioning, which I don't think is necessary, are there points that you'd like to amplify for the committee in terms of just generally where you've been in the seat for 7 days, and so I don't expect you to have the whole thing figured out yet. That'll take at least a month. But if you do have some points that we haven't in our thorough questioning raised, please, we're happy to give you some ample time to talk about those and the way forward.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that opportunity. I'll just make 2 quick points for the committee. The first would be, I think it's important that the Office of Personnel Management seek to get some points on the board here. And we're going to be trying to do that in 3 key areas in this first year on the job. First is in hiring reform. We're going to try to do that better. Now, I know that has been a rock that has sunk many a ship, but we're going to try. We're going to be working on reforming security clearances and making sure that that is secure and easy. So that, and I know those 2 things might not go hand in glove, so we're going to have to be very careful with it, but we've got to, where there's duplication, we need to weed it out and make it work better. And then third, I'm going to try to put points on the board on work life and workplace for the federal employees. I think it's essential. We've talked about a few of those items today. There are many more we can do, and I'm going to be about that. In terms of the bigger picture, we discussed a little bit about the overall of maybe building a majority pay system. The third and final thing I'd make to the committee's draw to their attention, it's going to be my intention. The mission of OPM right now is defined as providing an effective workforce for the federal government. Now, I think that's a relatively low bar mission. We need to obviously succeed at that mission. I think we need a bigger vision. My vision is not that we just provide an effective workforce, but that the United States government, since it is the largest employer, has a special responsibility of being the model employer to the nation. And my hope is to work with everyone in this room and with HR professionals throughout the government, throughout the private sector, throughout this Congress, to decide what are the best practices that are out there today and hold ourselves accountable, put metrics on the board. We may not get it done in the first term of the Obama administration. We may not get it done in the second term of the Obama administration, if the American people give that to us. But it's a path we can work towards to be the model employer and to implement those best practices for the men and women of the civil service. And that's going to be my vision, sir. I look forward to working with this committee to accomplish it, and I thank you very much for your opportunity to be with you today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I apologize, but could I ask just one question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please.
I applaud you for your goals. One goal that this committee, I believe, is concerned about is the use of annuitants and the whole process in the retirement. Will you be trying to or work with us on a reform that will allow for an efficient retention of our most skilled workers?
I think, Mr. Ice, I wholeheartedly agree with you. That's an issue we've got to wrestle with. It's a good one. I will be supportive of the principle. There's some cautions that we just have to be careful with. I think we need to recognize, on one hand, with an aging society, we've got to figure out how to recapture that talent and reuse it effectively. But at the same time, we don't want to foreclose promotional opportunities for mid-level managers who might see that, okay, we might, in solving one problem, create another, and that someone feels, well, there's no future for me here, I'll leave the federal government. So, we need to be careful as we move forward. And then the other thing we need to be sensitive to is we have to figure, as the President has said, how to make federal service cool again. How do we bring in that next generation? How do we inspire that next generation to come into public service? And I think there's creative ways we can do that and accomplish all of those objectives together. But if we keep all of them in mind, I hope we can craft a solution that'll work.
Well, thank you. I hope when you do an analysis of the number of former federal workers who are, in fact, in second careers as lobbyists or contractors back to and in the same seats they used to be in, that you'll weigh that as a portion of the reform most needed.
I think that's a great point, Mr. I say. And there could be also, might be able to be creative about this. Just let me throw out an idea for future discussion. What if, as we said, if we were reemploying an annuitant and not offsetting their annuity for a term period, let's say a couple of years? What if, as a condition of that reappointment, they would agree to spend 30% of their time on training a mid-level manager to move up, to fill their position when their term would expire? Or what if they would potentially adopt a newbie, somebody who's just coming in, who I hear constantly, one of the reasons we have such a low rate of hiring interns into the federal government is because we don't really support them. We kind of throw them into a job. There's not many young people around them. There's no one there to coach them and mentor them. Well, what if, as a condition of this, maybe you had to sign on and be a coach to a young person coming in and teach them the ropes and teach them how the federal government works? That may be a very effective knowledge transfer. And if we can creatively design that, then I believe the investment that will be required to accomplish it with the reemployment of the annuitants may well be a very good one for the taxpayer. And so I look forward to working with you on balancing those multiple issues.
I do too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. We did have one clarification on the part of Ms. Holmes Norton, and I would obviously offer the same opportunity for the gentleman from Utah as well. But Ms. Holmes Norton.
I just wanted to clarify what you said about diversity. Did you say that diversity hasn't moved since 1985?
It has been very slight improvements.
How do you account for that?
It is, we need to do better. We need to figure out how to involve the richness of our society and reflect it in our workforce that is fully legal and fully appropriate, because we need that breadth of skills in our civil service.
Mr. Berry, would you, again, get to the chairman of the committee, the figures on race and sex by grade in the federal workforce today and in 1985, and would you please break that down? Diversity doesn't mean all minorities get packed together.
Right.
They're black people, they're Hispanics, they're Asians. Break it down the way the figures do if they are done appropriately.
I'd be very happy to, Ms. Norton, and I think you'll also be very happy to hear. I don't know if the committee, the President announced this week that the Deputy Director that will be serving with me at the Office of Personnel Management, and I'm very excited by this, is Christine Griffin, who is now the EEOC Commissioner for Disability. And I think she's going to bring a special focus and attention and skill set on this issue to us in the department. I think she's going to be phenomenal if the Senate confirms her, and I really look forward to working with her. But we'll get you that information for the record.
Would the gentlelady yield on that item?
Be happy to yield to the gentleman.
Could you, I would suggest that you also take a look at your intern program and look at the profile there. By addressing the intern program, you may be able to solve that, but you first got to look at what are the facts as they apply to the intern program. Does that reflect the diversity in the community? And if it does, then you know where you can address and move this gen. If it doesn't, then you got to look other ways. But I'd look specifically at your intern program, see if that reflects the numbers that you want and the profile you want, and if it's so, then you know where to focus.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bilbrey, I think you're right. We also need to look not just at the interns, but at mid-career training programs and other sources like that, because they're essentially the pipeline, if you will, as you go up the ladder. And I think we need to look at this not just for the GS scale. We need to look at it at SES. We need to look everywhere. We need to have diversity throughout the government and at all of our ranks, and make sure we're providing opportunity to all of our citizens and encouraging that. And so we need, within the law, absolutely. And we need to look at each of those paths: internships, training programs, SES development, candidate development pools, and pay attention to all of them.
Well, Director Berry, we want to congratulate you on your new appointment, and we appreciate your willingness to come before the committee and help us with our work, and we look forward to working with you, because the tasks of this committee and your own responsibilities do overlap at so many different points. But thank you for your time.
It's been an honor and a pleasure, sir. Thank you all.